There is quite a bit of hype around a particular voter this election season. The person of interest, the millennial voter, specifically the female millennial voter. Political commentators say this particular demographic could have the power to decide the midterm election if they power up and head to the polls. There are more than 18 million millennial women in the U.S. and here to give a snapshot of their perspectives on our nation right now and the issues that matter to them most are 4 women from this voting bloc of varied political affiliations. Joining me at the desk is Democrat Yasmin Maddox, founder and CEO of Architect LLC, Republican Jamie Slocum, Chief of Staff for the Majority Office in the Monroe County Legislature, Democrat Caitlin Figueroa, Secretary of the Puerto Rican Parade, and registered Conservative Carrie Meisenzahl with the Monroe County Administration. Welcome to all of you and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So I have to begin by asking, given this hype, the polls, the surveys, all of the media attention focused on millennial women this election season, do you feel like the pressure is on? And I'll give that to you first, Jamie.
Yeah, I think the pressure is on for all voters, but particularly for female millennials. It's a large segment of the electorate that may not always be represented at the polls each election cycle. So, with a lot of people out in the media and in social media and that kind of stuff talking about it, I think that adds a little bit of pressure to see kind of what that segment will do.
Well, voter turnout for midterm elections, it is notoriously low. Recent surveys find that while 55% of millennials say they are likely to vote, a large portion says voting this year isn't more important than any other midterm election year, and that's according to a recent NBC News poll. Why do you think some political pundits and media outlets are saying female millennials could really decide what happened this election year? Caitlin?
I think a lot of it had to put on with Hillary running. A lot of people felt the need that it was going to be a first female president. So I put a lot of, responsibility on female voters. And with that being said, a lot of voters felt the necessary need to get involved, especially with her loss. So I think that's one of the reasons why.
Any other perspectives?
I agree. I think, however, that even the idea that female millennial voters alone could sway dramatically in one way or another sets us up for a false narrative, which is that the voting bloc is essentially that it's a monolithic group, when in fact we know, according to age, even variances of a year or two, whether you're married, whether you're single, what state you're in, all of these different dynamics and dimensions of who we are account for what we think, how we operate, and essentially how we show up to the polls. And so, repeated studies have shown that if you're married, you're tending to vote perhaps in a way different than if you are single, because you have different considerations. It's not just you and perhaps your considerations of reproductive rights, but it's that coupled with economics because you are running or co-running a household. So a lot of things come into play, and so I think it's dangerous to think that we are a monolithic group.
Interesting. It begs the question then, what do you care about, right? Like, what if we can get inside the mind of the millennial woman? What is priority for you when you look at the state of local communities, when you look at our state, New York, when we look at the country, as a whole? What would you say, this is number one for me? This is what I care about. Carrie?
So for me, it's always just been the economy and taxes and the ability to work across the aisle. I know it's not maybe the most popular opinion for a female millennial, but it's always just been what my values and opinions have been from growing up until now.
Do you think there's more of a pressure, I don't even know if pressure is the right word, in terms of working across the aisle now than you've seen in the past?
Yeah, definitely, just because of the focus on the media has on these voters and on millennials. I think that it's important that, and it is pressured that we do work across the aisle and work together to do what's best for the community.
Yeah, if I could piggyback, I think that, you know, there's a lot of focus in government on the disagreements, but there's also a lot of agreement. And I think that that isn't always the headline story. So I think that some people could very easily get the objective that people aren't getting along, that people aren't working together to get things done. So, you know, I always kind of look to see, at the end of the day, you know, we're all people. We have different needs in different areas, different communities, and when, you know, an elected official or multiple elected officials or multiple layers of government are working together to kind of try to solve whatever situation it is, whether it's, you know, lakeshore flooding that we had in Monroe County or some other issue specific to a different community, I think that that's very important to focus on, and just to see how they're doing it, and if they are or if they aren't.
Caitlin.
I feel like with the importance of a millennial when it comes to voting has to do a lot with my community-based. To be able to fight for what I believe in, and with that being said, yes, my personal body is something that I vote on. So if I have someone telling me what I can and cannot do with my body, and it's a vote that gets to dictate that, that is why I'm there. That is why I'm fighting to be able to make that change and vote against or for it.
It's interesting, there was a poll that was done, and this was a CBS News poll and Refinery 29, and it found that, I'm trying to find the exact stat, but it was 70% of millennial women believed that they were losing liberty in terms of their own body. And so this poll found that healthcare was primarily the #1 concern of millennial women. You mentioned that that's a big reproductive rights, et cetera. I would imagine that's all
it goes across the board. I mean, when it comes to making a decision on whether or not, you know, what I can and cannot do with my personal self, that's a concern for me. And if the government has to butt in and make a decision for me, I think that's a problem for me. And I speak on behalf of myself and many others that agree that I don't want, you know, I don't want to sit here and say, okay, you know, I understand the technicalities of the medical field. I understand the technicalities of, you know, the healthcare field and what they're trying to do. But when it comes to my personal self, I'm going to get involved. I'm going to make a difference, and I'm going to fight for what I believe in.
Yasmin.
Agreed. I think because we are in such a polarized political climate, there are a lot of parlor tricks. There are a lot of, to use the term which has been thrown around a lot lately, especially concerning the Florida election for governor, dog whistle politics. So I think, you know, there's still that entrenched talk of reproductive rights versus, you know, liberties over here, states' rights and things like that. And I think how it shakes out for a lot of female millennial voters is that we are, and the poll that I was reading last night, which was posted on Vanity Fair's site, shocked me, quite honestly. We are less likely to consider ourselves to be feminists, which would seem kind of jarring based on the conversation so far. I think it was to the tune of 67 or even 70%. But I think what's happening is that a lot of these labels are becoming diluted because of the conversations that we're having, to the point where, you know, if everybody is this, you know, and choose whatever term, then it really loses its power. Additionally, I think the fact that so many female millennial voters and male millennial voters are contending with just oppressive student loan debt, I think economics and the financial situation will be much more at the forefront than anything else. I think for the most part, even though certainly for Democrats, reproductive rights is a sticking point for us, I think it's not going to be as important this election. I think the financial issues are going to be much more. I think we see at the national level whenever we have presidential elections, you know, to quote, it's the economy, stupid. It always comes down to the money. It always comes down to what constraints people feel at the end of the day. Can I get a cup of coffee? Can I put gas in my car? And everything else really does become secondary. That may not be right, but I do think it is the reality of the situation.
So, Carrie, you said priority for you is working across the aisle. Are there, and I ask this to all of you, are there issues that you see as relevant and that are absolutely possible, you think, in terms of both sides kind of coming together to try to find some type of balancing point or agreement?
I think I would say on a national level that healthcare is a big one, you know, in Congress. I think that, you know, there's a lot of opinions one way or the other, and a lot of people have different ideas, but I think that at the end of the day, you know, you have stories of people that have been, you know, really helped by the Affordable Care Act, and then you have people that maybe have had a more negative experience since that law has been enacted. You know, 8 years ago. So I think that somewhere in the middle is probably where we need to be to make sure that everyone, or as many people as possible's needs are met. So I think, you know, when you talk about Congress, I think that that's a huge one where they really can just put everything aside and just look at kind of the basis of where things were, where they are now, and maybe where they need to be.
Any other areas?
No, I agree. And piggybacking off of the healthcare issue, I think that if we focus on supporting businesses that are able to create good paying jobs to provide American workers and their families with good healthcare, then you might see like a good significant impact and a positive change.
Relating back to healthcare, I work for a small company. And regardless of the Affordable Care Act or prior to 8 years ago, healthcare has always been expensive. It's always been an issue, and it's going to continue to be a bigger issue as we progress, especially with all the changes that are going to be implemented with the current administration. I'm affected by it. It's expensive. I don't have an organization that I work in that pays out, and I think that it's something that, as a millennial voting, that's another big issue that I would state that we have to get in our gears and get other millennials and other female millennials involved in.
I'm curious as to how all of you feel about our current political climate and ways in which you think that there have been divisions created among women, millennial women in particular, that we don't often hear discussed in the media. Perhaps they're conversations that you've had with colleagues or friends or family members of the same age. Are there things that you think are important people know about and be aware of leading into this election? So
I'm going to start off with hearing from these two women right here sitting at the table. It's different to know that, you know, we were just talking about in the waiting room what media can do to be able to separate two parties. And when it comes down to it, I think getting together and conversating and being able to bring your thoughts together, especially two separate parties, I feel like the media and I guess being brainwashed in some retrospect that, you know, Republicans are this and Democrats are that, and I don't mean to go so drastic, but in some way, shape, or form, I've heard from an independent, you know, Democrats are about rainbows and unicorns, and conservatives are all about, you know, money, and they're worried about how we're going to spend it and what we're going to do with it. And to me, I'm like, wow, to hear from independent, I just heard two ideas of two separate parties that know nothing about anything, and I don't think that way.
No, I agree. I think that social media is a huge vehicle for some of this to kind of permeate into society. I think that, you know, I have friends that I know are Democrats or, you know, blanks, independents, whatever. You know, they have different ideas. Sometimes we have the same ideas. We just don't have the same letter next to our name. But, you know, with certain friends, you know, especially when presidential elections heat up, and then I mean, I'm sure we've all seen on social media, like, people can be very passionate and use that vehicle to kind of share their thoughts and ideas. And so with some friends, I find myself tiptoeing around things. Maybe we don't talk about it, but, you know, I do have friends where we occasionally can sit down and kind of talk about, depending on what's going on, there might have been something like a recent vote or a recent event where we can kind of sit down and talk about it. And I always thought it made me feel stronger about my convictions by hearing other people's viewpoints. And sometimes you pick up on something and you're like, geez, you know, I never thought of it that way, but maybe I can kind of think about that that and maybe even change how I feel about it, or just, you know, take that information and feel even stronger, you know, before I knew that. So I think, you know, knowledge is power, and having conversations like that, they're important, and they can just kind of help people to really figure out exactly how they feel. It's not somebody telling them how they feel about it because of the letter next to their name.
In a poll I read that 30% of millennial women believe the country is moving in the right direction, compared to 70% who believe things are going in the wrong direction. As we close, just one word, and I'll give this to you, Yasmin. What would you tell millennial women, and just in terms of if that's how you feel, whether you agree or disagree with that, you need to get to the polls?
3 words, I think, whatever. But, you know, life moves on. You just have to, nothing stands still. You have to act. You have to be decisive, but you have to be informed first. So read multiple news outlets, get varying perspectives, come to a conclusion, and then activate whatever it is that you're feeling.
We have to close, but a special thank you to all of my guests for joining me for this important conversation, really giving viewers a better idea of the perspectives and priorities of millennial women in our region. There are 2 important dates for you to remember. Thursday, September 13th is our local primary election day in Monroe County. That's from noon to 9 p.m. And general election day is Tuesday, November 6th. That's from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Now, WXXI News will have coverage of the primary night results starting at 9 p.m. on Thursday, September 13th. That's on AM 1370, FM 1075, WXXInews.org, our mobile app, and of course, you can ask your smart speaker to play WXXI News.